Hi, friends. Bashevkin again with a quick message from our sponsors at dailygiving.org. They've been sponsoring our entire month, and so much of the way that we prepare for the high holidays is by expanding who we care for. And Daily Giving, which is just $1 a day, automated every single day, and every single day they pick a different charity, doing incredible work, sending it out to all the donors, the work that they're doing. And it is a way of collective giving and expanding your horizons of charity. And sign up now and make sure that you list how'd you hear about it through 1840, because that is a way to not just help dailygiving.org, it also helps 1840. And I'm just so grateful to our listeners. It means a lot to me that we are able to inspire, not just in conversation, not just from who we're exposed to, but really to be inspired into action, and to do a collective act of chesed together is incredibly meaningful and beautiful. You can sign up now at dailygiving.org. Hi, friends, and welcome to the 1840 podcast, where each month we explore a different topic, balancing modern sensibilities with traditional sensitivities to give you new approaches to timeless Jewish ideas. I'm your host, Bashevkin, and this month we're continuing our annual exploration of the topic of Teshuva. Thank you so much to our series sponsors and heroes, Daniel and Mira Stokar. I am so grateful for your friendship, support, and of course, your patience. This podcast is part of a larger exploration of those big, juicy Jewish ideas. So be sure to check out 1840.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. This is a strange confession that I've made before, but one of the hardest things, it's not obviously the hardest thing, but it is one of the things that has become more difficult to talk about since October 7th, is how difficult it is to talk about anything other than October 7th. Meaning, I've had a hard time this entire year being able to talk about and almost process what was going on in my own personal life, because I felt everything paled in comparison to October 7th, which in many ways is obviously true. But it leads to something that you kind of press down a lot of the issues, a lot of the emotions, a lot of the frustrations that you may be grappling with over the course of a normal life. And you feel almost inappropriate centering, surfacing, processing, talking about those things. At least I did, when there are people who are literally in captivity. We still have hostages. There are people, so many people murdered, so many people so vulnerable. And it felt unimaginable to me to allow myself to let, the everyday, frustrations, feeling let down, insecurities, being able to process that. And I spent a lot of months this year in particular ignoring it. And I really felt it weigh down on me. Why am I sharing this to you now as an introduction? Is because I can't really explain why I felt so necessary and it was so important to share our guest today's story. Our guest today is someone named Emmi Polansky. She's not all that famous. I don't think so. I found her because she has an account on Instagram called Living Emunah. Emunah meaning the Hebrew word for faith, spelled E-M-U-N-A-H. There are a lot of people on Instagram who share, chizuk and encouragement and inspiration, etc., etc. And I'll be honest with you, as somebody who views themselves in the, inspiration adjacent content creation world, I'm groaning inside as I'm saying it, but I'm in that space. I'm not quite like the Instagram influencer, psych you up, pump you up, Hashem loves you no matter what type of influencer, but I can slip into that mode. Longtime listeners have heard me, I can get there, but be it as it may, I have developed a great deal of cynicism to most of these accounts. I roll my eyes. I think it is absolute, it's Narishkeit, it's superficial, whatever it is. It's my own brokenness that I'm not able to, get the encouragement that they're intended to perceive. It draws out a cynicism in me, this kind of over positivity, because my gut reaction, and maybe this is because I grew up in the home of an oncologist, it's probably likely so, where I kind of, when you're in a home that deals with cancer every day at the heart of what it is, then whatever you're going through kind of pales in comparison. And I have a hard time when I listen to people who, I don't know, know, doesn't seem like they went through much, or you don't really see where the wisdom's coming from, then I have a hard time really paying attention. And I've had that feeling almost this entire year. It's been exacerbated this year in my own inability to really process my own everyday emotions, because I felt myself once again like being cynical towards my own emotions, and I probably needed some actual chizuk, some actual positivity. And I stumbled on this account, and this is somebody who was dealt an extraordinarily difficult hand in life. There are people, I'm sure, who have it worse. Many, many more people have it better. She is a single mother, and I grew up where my instinct to process emotions after being dealt a bad hand is to kind of have this like defeatist attitude, this like, I probably deserve that. It shouldn't have worked out. I shouldn't have even gotten my hopes up. And it's this very pessimistic, you get dealt a bad hand and the locus of control in your life gets taken away from you. You believe that, it was almost for a reason, And, as religious Jews, I guess we're supposed to say it was for a reason. And sometimes we usually attribute that reason because of our own unworthiness, or at least that's how I interpreted it. And what inspired me so much about Emmi Polansky living Emunah is that after being dealt a very difficult hand, she used that to almost assert her own agency in her own life, with just leaning into a positivity that I find so incredibly remarkable and moving, that even if I tried to muster all the cynicism that I contain, it doesn't overwhelm just her sincerity, her honesty, and the way that she, I think, embodies a very natural, organic form of teshuva. A teshuva where we, not for repenting on our sins, on our unworthiness, but a teshuva where we step into our worthiness, where each year we take more agency and more responsibility for our lives with even greater positivity and with even greater joy. That after being dealt a difficult hand, the teshuva that we do is not on focusing why was I undeserving, but instead to hold even tighter and to refine with even more clarity your deservedness and your worthiness. And doing teshuva, so to speak, on taking total agency of your life and saying, Afal Pikein, even though, despite all this, I'm still going to live with that honest sincerity and optimism. And I'm not going to allow myself to drift into a cynicism, a defeatist cynicism that hears that baskol, that voice from heaven, to use the imagery of the Talmud, that in the story of Acher is a story that is found in the Talmud about 4 rabbis who entered into this mystical garden called of Pardes. And each of the rabbis has a different reaction by kind of their confrontation. The only rabbi who walks out, intact, B'Shalom, intact, whole, is Rebbe Akiva. And his counterpart, the Rebbe who drifted, who left traditional Jewish life, is called Acher, the other. This is a famous Milton Steinberg novel, As a Driven Leaf. It is a fictional retelling of the story of Acher, known as Elisha ben Avuya. And in the story, he keeps on hearing this voice from heaven that says, everyone can do tshuva, chutz me Acher, except me. And he keeps on hearing this voice. And that was his confrontation that drove him into heresy, that I have no hope. That when that voice kept on crying out in this story in the Talmud, and again, this story can be found in the Talmud in Tractate Chagigah 15a. But in that story, Acher, Rebbe Elisha ben Avuya, after he, comes out of this mystical confrontation, he says, I heard from heaven, from behind the curtains, in the, in the Holy of Holies, wherever I was, from behind the curtain, Shuvu banim shovavim, all my children. God says, I want all my children to return, chutz me Acher, except me. And as many point out in this story, this voice that he heard, that everybody can return except Acher, this was his own projection. This is the voice that so many of us hear. I'm sure we've all heard it. We've had times in our lives when you get dealt a really bad hand in life, sometimes that reaction is you feel like you're hearing a voice from heaven that says, Chutz, accept David Bashevkin, accept this person, accept me. It feels like God is sending you a message that you are undeserving of love, you are undeserving of success, you are undeserving of whatever that dream that each of us hold. We've all been dealt a setback, and maybe not all of us react that way, but I certainly have in my life, where I look at that very setback and I hear a voice just like Acher, Shuvu Banim Shovavim. It's going to work out for everybody. Chutz me, except for David Bashevkin, except for you, except for me. And you get that setback and you have this pessimism, this fatalism. And I actually wrote about this. I have a book. I haven't plugged my book in ages. I'll do tshuva for this, to repent for this. I did write a book on sin and failure in Jewish thought. It's called Synagogue, spelled Sinagogue, synagogue. Cute, it's a pun. Trust me, most people hated it. I actually lost an approbation. One person did not write me a letter, somebody important, somebody who I love, who later apologized because he hated the title so much. People didn't like the title. So anyways, I actually write about that in my book, about this whole story of Acher. The way I write about it there is that heaven does not reject Acher. Elisha ben Avuya rejects Acher. He could not reconcile his Torah with the direction of his life. He therefore begins to interpret all Torah and divinity as pointing him in the direction away from God. Like he felt pushed away. At the core of Acher's failure is theological cynicism and pessimistic fatalism. Everything he sees points him in the wrong direction. His loss of faith in God is intertwined with the loss of faith in himself. Acher, the other, is in many ways what he condemns himself to be. Meaning sometimes we project, and this is something I've dealt with, our inner cynicism and kind of a personal volatility of what's going on, and that setback that we have, onto the enduring optimism of God. And the reason why I am so excited for today's guest is because it's someone in my mind who was dealt a tough hand and had a real confrontation, but was yatsa b'shalom, like Rabbi Akiva, was left shalom, whole, peace, intact, has an optimism and a sincerity towards life that I find so incredibly inspiring, and to me embodies a form of tshuva that in this very moment resonates quite deeply with me and what so many may be grappling with on the most personal of levels. In our day-to-day lives, all that emotional baggage that has built up, especially over the past 6 months when, we haven't given ourselves always the self-compassion and space to process what we're going through in our own lives. Somebody who embodies all of that and more. It is my absolute privilege and pleasure to introduce our conversation with Emmi Polansky. I found your content for the first time on Instagram, where you kind of documented your own journey, and it really is a fascinating one. You are a single mother raising a child and really doing incredible work. Your Instagram handle, I will just say it up front, is Living Emunah.
Yes.
Living Faith.
My name is Emunah. Emmi is from Emunah, so it was like a play on words of both living with Emunah and living with faith, and also my name is Emunah. So
I love that. I totally missed that. But the reason why I think that your story is so compelling is actually for an incredibly sad reason. You went through something that was very difficult, and that's really where I wanted to begin. Obviously, if you have a child, kind of obviously, it's not always the case, you were married at a point.
Yes, I was.
You were married briefly. I was wondering, we're not going to get into details. This isn't about finding all the players involved. God forbid, that's not what we are trying to do. But I was wondering if you could take me from the beginning of your story. When you got married, how many years ago was that?
I got married December 2019.
Wow. So that's just about 5 years ago.
Yeah. I was married for a little over a year. I got pregnant pretty quickly. I was married for 4 months when I got pregnant. And then when my son was 9 weeks old, my ex-husband came home from shul on Erev Pesach, and he told me he was going home. This was totally out of nowhere. I didn't really know what going home meant at the time. It was not like we were, constantly fighting or there was some massive breakdown in our marriage.
At that point, if I were to have seen Emmi Polansky just in the supermarket and would have asked you, how's it going? How's married life? What would you have responded, the day before?
I would have said it was great. I mean, I had just had a baby. I had a C-section, so I was in the recovery mode. But overall, I thought that I was very, very happy. And, obviously no marriage is perfect. But in the moment and in the time, I really did not realize that there was anything wrong with the marriage. I still looking back, I never fully got clarity, but we'll get there. I really thought that I was happily married until I wasn't. It was like snap of your fingers.
And this is all taking place on Erev Pesach. So you are
Yes.
blindsided by this. You think, as far as you're concerned, everything is going fine. At what time of the day on Erev Pesach is this?
So Pesach was Friday. This was Thursday morning.
And where did you plan on spending Pesach that year?
The first days were going to be by my parents, and then the second days were going to be by his parents, my in-laws. And when he came home and said, I'm leaving, I was like, where are you going? What does that mean, you're leaving? And he said, no, I'm going to my parents' house. And I was like, but we're going to your parents' house the second days. What is going on? I didn't really get any explanation. He kind of just packed a bag and left. And then Pesach happened.
So where did you spend Sedarim the first days?
Right after that, I went straight home. I went to my parents' house.
With your child?
With my child.
A
got in the
9-week-old
car.
baby.
My 9-week-old baby. I was very fresh post C-section, and I had just been cleared to drive. Got in the car, drove. Thankfully, my parents lived very, very close. And so I drove right to my parents' house, and I kind of just broke down. It's honestly a blur, but I just remember feeling so lost and confused. I was repeatedly trying to call him to try and understand what was going on, because we weren't in a fight. Like, nothing happened. It was just like he came home and he left. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on here.
And it didn't, I assume, pick up your phone calls?
No, I was totally ignored. I tried, reaching out to his family, but I just did not hear from anybody. And I didn't hear from him until right before Pesach the next day. So 24 hours later, Yontif was almost starting, and he was like, we'll talk after Yontif. And that was all I got. Going into Yontif was very, very hard. It was my son's first Pesach. And I remember sitting by the Seder feeling so lost and confused, and I could not stop crying. I just remember when I look back at that time, one of the things that stick out to me the most is how I just could not stop crying. I was just so overwhelmed and confused. I just lacked any sort of clarity. It was just so overwhelming and traumatic.
You didn't really have any language because you didn't really understand what had happened. How old are you at this point?
I was 23.
So you got married. You weren't super young, and you wouldn't have considered yourself older at that time when you got married.
Right. I was 21. I got engaged at 20 and married at 21. I got divorced when I was 23.
So you were fairly young when you got married.
Yeah.
But those early years of marriage, when you look back at them, you don't see any immediate and obvious red flags that it was going to end this way.
Oh, definitely not. Sometimes you say when you're out of a situation, you can see these, massive blaring red flags. Looking back, I don't see anything that was so obvious that would point me to this happening. And anyone that has heard the story and knows me or knows my ex, it doesn't really make sense. Like, there was nothing really there that happened. I was happily, quote unquote, happily married. And, it just, one day I was married and one day I wasn't. And I had to learn to deal with that and to live with that.
Over Pesach, if I would have seen Emmi again, similar question, I would have said, "What are you getting divorced? What happened?" Was that on your mind? Did you realize that the fact that you had a 9-week-old child and you're spending Seder alone, this probably means the marriage is not going to last, or you weren't able to process that far? What did you think was happening as it was happening?
At the time, I think I might have thought that there was something that I had done that I didn't realize. I was like backtracking, trying to think of something that I had said or something that I had done. Like, did I miss something? Did I say something? Like, something must have happened that I had done. Like, it had to have been me. Something had to have happened that caused me. So I was just sitting and really like doing a ton of deep soul searching and introspection to try and figure out, like, maybe there was something that I just did not realize. Was I not paying enough attention? Was I focusing too much on the baby? I was just trying to come up with some justification for what was going on, but I was very much in shock. I don't think my mind necessarily went to divorce. I wasn't really there yet. I would say more after Pesach, I think I realized realized that this was going downhill really, really fast. But over Pesach, in those moments, I remember it was Chol Hamoed, and my family went to an aquarium. And I remember just walking around the aquarium, holding my little 9-week-old newborn baby, and I just I couldn't stop crying. I just could not function. I was so confused, and I just felt so betrayed and confused. And at that point, once Chol Hamoed had hit, we had already spoken a little bit, and I already had a little bit more clarity to the fact that I wasn't having any clarity and that there wasn't really any reason. Like after Pesach, I'll backtrack a little bit. After Pesach, the first days on Motzei Pesach, I reached out to try and figure out what was going on. I was literally counting down the seconds. I remember as Pesach was coming to a close, I'm like watching the clock and I'm like 1 minute, 39 seconds. And then like I texted him and I was waiting for him to come online, and I'm watching the phone, and I was like so anxious to like get this, like what happened. And over Pesach, I had come to this place where I was like, I'm going to figure this out, and whatever I had done, I'm going to take responsibility. And I was like so ready to like fix the argument.
Patch this up, fix it.
Yeah, like I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And that did not happen. There wasn't really any reason as to why he had left. He didn't really have much to say, and Big Rabbanim got involved, and essentially, not to delve too much into it, but he didn't want to be married anymore.
Okay.
And there wasn't really any reason for it. And I never got a reason. I never got clarity. And I learned to live with that and to grow from it.
To live without clarity, which I think that's part of the reason why I was so enchanted by your content, because it is a story without a happy ending that ends with a happy narrator. Meaning the trajectory of the narrative did not really affect your ability to narrate this story with joy, even talking now, because there's an ambiguity in the fact that it is different. There are marriages that end very quickly, and when that happens and there's no child, it's kind of like, okay, like let's pretend that didn't happen, take two,
Right.
Get back into the dating world. When there is a child, that really tethers you to the person who you had that child with for the rest of your life, for the rest of the life of that child, and you have that responsibility, and you have to almost continue to have and hold space for the father of the child,
Yes.
which is the source of your pain. First, tell me, how long did it take you to get a formal divorce?
So it took around 6 months.
Is that long or short?
It felt very long. It felt very, very long. It was definitely dragged out, but it's interesting because in the moment, at first, I was like, I don't want my get. I don't want it. Right?
You wanted to still save this.
I was like, yeah, like, let's try and fix this. Let's go to therapy. Let's do this. I'll do whatever you need, whatever you want, whatever it is, I will do. I don't want to be a single parent. I don't want to be divorced. I don't even know what happened. Like, I don't understand this. Let's try and work on it. Like, if you want to get divorced, it is well within anybody's right to want to get divorced. And I never once said, like, you cannot get divorced. If you want to get divorced. But let's first try to fix whatever it is that you're struggling with, because that's just my nature. And I guess most people would probably want that, but that was not the case. And so it took me a little bit of time until I started asking for it. I would say probably a month and a half or 2 months until I was like, okay, like if we're not going to be married, then let's be divorced so that I can have closure, somewhat, some sense of closure, and begin to move forward. And time was passing and I wasn't getting it. And I remember it was getting close to Rosh Hashanah, and I was so nervous that I was going to go into Rosh Hashanah without that closure. Like, at that point, I just needed it to be done.
You were literally at the time of year where we are right now, which is up to
it's crazy.
Like a week or two before Rosh Hashanah.
Exactly.
And what happened?
And so I did. I got my get, Baruch Hashem.
Before Rosh Hashanah.
Right before Rosh Hashanah.
What were you like emotionally at the divorce proceedings? Meaning you have these like 6 months where you're able to at least process your lack of clarity, process this like what just happened, and almost begin to, I wouldn't say move on and start a new life because it's still so fresh, but at least like the hold of the way it takes hold of your ruminations, I hope got a little bit softer, but then you're thrust back. And I don't know if your ex-husband was present at the divorce or sent an agent, a shliach, to do it, but tell me a little bit about what it felt like in that room getting divorced, like actually receiving a get. get?
It's interesting because all that time when I was waiting and I was like, I need the get. It's so funny because really Hashem, everything that Hashem does, like it's so crazy that everything is in its right time, because I don't know that if I would have gotten my get right away, I would have been on the floor. Like I would have been in pieces. And the fact that I had that time to prepare myself and beg for it, by the time I got it, I was like, oh, like Baruch Hashem, not Baruch Hashem that I'm divorced. Obviously I was miserable, but I was like, Baruch Hashem, at least I have my get. And it almost gave me this sense of like relief of like, okay, at least I have this. So being there and, going through the get process was very, very hard.
Why was it so hard?
The get process is very intentional, and everything about it is very, very intentional. And there's certain lishonos, there's certain languages that are used where the husband has to say to the wife, you are no longer my wife. You are free to pursue other men. And the wife has to say, you are no longer my husband. And it's just very like jarring and very much a reality check. And I think in that moment, saying those words and hearing your soon to be no longer spouse tell you, you are free to pursue other men and you are no longer my wife, is very hard. It's a very hard thing to hear. And I think anybody, even if you've gone through the worst marriage and are married for an extended period of time and there's a tremendous breakdown in the marriage, anybody who hears those words from their spouse, it's a lot. It really is a lot.
It's very final, meaning
yes.
This is over. This is complete. Emotionally, when you received your get, was that heavy or you were like almost like disassociated? Where were you emotionally?
I think I was better than I thought I was going to be, but I wasn't okay.
Okay, you were not okay.
Like I wasn't on the floor. I was so nervous going into it that I was going to be like, that I was going to cry and that I wouldn't be able to whatever. And there were points that I think I got very emotional, obviously. And maybe I cried a little. I think I blocked most of it out, but I was okay. I walked out and it was hard. And, later that day it was a very hard day for me, but I was okay, which I think was really due to all of that time that I had to prepare.
So now you have a get in a course of 6 months, a period that should be the climax of your joy of, I'm in a marriage, I just had a child, and now within 6 months, the story is reversed in kind of this tragic way where you're now a very young single mother. You are 23 years old. I assume you moved back into your parents' house?
Yes, I did. I moved in. I never left. The day that I came home, that Thursday, I never left.
How do you start to cope and now look at your future in that first year? I mean, this is still a few years ago that we're talking about this. I don't know what somebody does after they get a get or after they get a divorce document. Like, do you go out to eat? Do you get ice cream? Do you binge watch Netflix? What is your way of coping in the immediate aftermath of this 6-month blur?
So I think right away, I don't think I did anything. If I did, I don't remember it. I went home and held my newborn and bawled my eyes out probably. And then a day or two later, when the shock passed or whatever it was, whatever feelings I had when that passed, I was like, okay, like now what? Now what? Because now I'm really a single mom. And before it was like, okay, I'm kind of a single mom. Shortly after my ex left, my brother got married. And that was my announcement to the world in a way that I was divorced, and I wasn't even divorced yet. I honestly didn't even fully understand everything that was happening at the time. It was still kind of unsure, but my mom called almost everyone on the guest list and told them that my ex was not going to be there in advance. So that nobody would ask me. And I didn't know. She did not tell me.
What an incredible act of sensitivity from a mother. I mean, she must be a very special person to have the foresight to say you're going to be at the wedding of your older brother, and your mother calls in advance all the guests to say, Emmy's going to be by herself at this wedding. So, approach with sensitivity and thoughtfulness.
Exactly. And I did not know until afterwards that this was done. So it wasn't even like she said, I let everyone know you're going to be okay. Like I just went in and it was just okay.
That's so moving. That's like biblical, because it reminds me of the story of Rachel and Leah, where according to Rev Schwab, the way he reads the story is that Rachel gives over the secrets to Leah, letting her know that, these are the secret symbols that I worked out with Yaakov. And Rev Schwab says that Rachel never told Leah that Rachel was the first choice. She just gave them over, saying like, Yaakov told me to give these over to you. The acts of chesed that are totally behind closed door, where the recipient doesn't even know that they're happening at the time, to me, it's otherworldly. But continue. I was very moved by that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very, very special of her. And to this day, I have so much akar satov for that. Just one tiny action, but it was not so tiny. I think one of the most intense moments for me in that wedding, which it was a roller coaster of emotions. Obviously, I was so happy for my older brother. Like, I was overjoyed for him and also so broken. Like, it was so hard. I remember standing by the Bashevkin and being like, this was just me 5 seconds ago. Like, what is going on? But one of the main questions leading up to the wedding was, am I going to walk down the aisle? Because, you know, all the family walks down and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And when I realized, like, I am not walking down the aisle. I have nothing to hide here. Lived my life and now I'm not with my ex. Like, I didn't do anything wrong and I have nothing to be ashamed of. And it was almost like my moment in my own self of coming into myself and showing myself that I was capable. It was like my first stand. And I wasn't even fully divorced yet, but it was my first stand within myself where I was like, I'm going to be okay. Like, I'm going to walk down and it's going to be hard and I'm going to be okay. And it was really a very powerful moment. I think everyone who knew anything about the story, you know, my cousins and close family, because at the time, you know, no one really knew, but the close family that knew the full story, everyone was bawling as I walked down because it was a very intense moment. And I still look back on that. I'm like, that was my switch. That was when my switch really flipped.
That's where I'm going to walk down by myself and hold my head up high. I was going to ask you that, meaning that's where you made a conscious choice. I am not going to, you know, kind of walk around nebuch, woe is me. I'm going to walk down as painful and as broken as I may feel inside, but my head is going to be held up high.
Exactly.
You know, it's so interesting because you share this story on Instagram and it's so much of it is about personal fitness and like you're running marathons and
yes.
And it's all really, I think the common theme to me is like agency, of you taking radical agency for your life, having confronted how not in control we all are of our own lives.
Right.
I'm wondering, were you always like working out? Was that always a major focus of your life, or is that something you only discovered as a process in the healing of this?
So it was definitely something that I discovered afterwards. I would say probably 9 months after everything happened, I joined a local gym and I fell in love with fitness. Not because of, I mean, the physical is great, but the emotional connection and understanding of yourself that you gain in fitness, to me, was something that was life-changing. And I really know that so much of my growth started from that gym. And I have so much akar satov to that gym and to that space because it really was my springboard for growth, being able to find an outlet that is so difficult. If fitness is hard, lifting weights is difficult, and being able to either, you know, just forget about whatever it is that you're dealing with or whatever it is that you're going through just for a little bit, or be able to confront it head on while lifting weights. There's just something that was very powerful about it. And then from there, I started running. And running reminds me a lot of life because it is very difficult and it takes consistency in order to be successful at it. And it's still hard. And even I think elite runners still struggle with running. And I think that that's something that is so powerful, is that everybody who runs all started, and all fitness in general, but everybody who runs all started from the same place. And everybody who runs is struggling because it's so hard, but it's so good for you. And it's such an incredible feeling and such an incredible accomplishment when you do it, that you feel so good. And it also gives you the space, like I said, in general, like just with fitness, it gives you the space to process whatever it is that you're feeling, and also to set goals and accomplish them. And I think that for me, one of the best things was setting goals and accomplishing them, because it gave me a purpose. And having a purpose is so important, especially when my purpose kind of felt like it went out the window. It was like, okay, I'm married and I have a baby and now I'm great. And, you know, my life's trajectory is everything that I planned. I'm a very big planner. I've always been a planner.
Yeah, your identity went out the window.
My entire identity.
A young mother, you know, especially with her your first child is like, this is me, this is who I am, I have finally found myself, and was pulled out from under you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what effect this had on you religiously. I assume you were from observant Orthodox when you got married.
Yes.
I don't know your family super well, but I happen to know your older brother, and all of your content is very clear that you are an observant woman.
Yeah.
But you go through this, and when a relationship falls apart, it's not just the relationship, but the religious dream falls apart. We are raised in a community and an environment where the fulfillment of, so to speak, each of our individual dreams is to have the family, have the children, and then you made it, and then the rug got pulled out from under you. I can't imagine somebody going through that and it not having some effect or just some trauma involved in your relationship to God, to the community. I mean, none of us speak directly or hear from God directly. And the way that we hear from God is through the way that we engage with the world and the way that we engage with ourselves. And the person who is most intimate and most closest to you, your husband, is now no longer. And for many people, the same way that our relationship with our parents can often be a lens to how we relate to divinity and religion, for sure, the way that we relate to our spouses is literally the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And for you to be in the Holy of Holies, to be married, to just have a child, and then literally just it disappear, and now all of a sudden you're out, you're no longer in it. I can't imagine just how to make sense of that religiously. How did you make sense at the time? Did it have a very negative effect on you religiously? And if so, how did you learn to pick up the pieces?
So, yes. Yes to everything. I grew up, and both my parents are Baal Teshuva, and I grew up going to Eish Kodesh. And so Hasidus, Rav Moshe Weinberger.
Former 1840 guest 2 times.
Yes.
Claim to fame. Sorry.
It's incredible. The fact that I'm on the same podcast as Rav Moshe Weinberger in itself, I'm like, yes.
Dayenu.
Dayenu. Yeah. So I grew up with learning Bilvavi, Mishkan, Evne, which is creating a space for Hashem in your heart.
That's a Hasidic work that was written. It was originally written anonymously. The author is no longer anonymous, but the entire work is kind of a very accessible presentation of how to bring divinity, transcendent religiosity, religious thinking into your life. A lot of people learn Bilvavi, Mishkan, Evne. Right. Most people are not trying to fill the hole that you then discover in your life. It'll get you through a bad roommate situation in seminary, but this is a whole nother.
It did, by the way. Yeah, I will say it was my foundation. I always had that. I was always like, I learned Bilvavi. That was like my thing. And my name is Emunah, and I have Emunah, and it was like a whole beautiful story. It was my whole brand. And after I got divorced, I felt, like you said, like the rug was ripped out from under me. Literally, physically, metaphorically, all of the E's. I felt so betrayed by everyone and everything. It was just like the ultimate betrayal. And I spoke with Rav Moshe Weinberger, and he said something so powerful that really helped me. I said something, I don't remember the exact conversation, but I said something, and I could never say it the way that he says it. So let's just take it as best as we can. But sure. I said something like, my whole life I was so good. Like, I was so good. I wasn't friends with boys. I kept shomer negiah, and I covered my knees, and I covered my elbows, and I covered my hair, and I did everything by the book because I wanted that. I wanted that life. I wanted to have, when I was dating, I wanted to be dating for marriage. I just wanted to be clean. And I was Shmira Seinayim.
You wanted a family, everything.
I was so on top of it. Even as like a young kid, even when I was 12 years old, I was already like, I would read a book and it would have something not nice, quote unquote, in it, and I would close the book. Like, that was always just how I was. I was always just on the path. And I was so careful about everything, even as I was dating my ex, like with shomer negiah and everything. Like, I was just so on top of it. And I just felt so betrayed because it was like,
what did get me?
I went through. Yeah. Like, what was the point? Like, it was so hard. Sneeze is so hard for me. It is so hard. Covering my hair, so hard for me. Doing everything. Like, being a religious Jew is not easy, and doing these things, especially as a Orthodox girl, a lot of times, and I'm sure this is for the men too, but I can only speak as my experience as a woman, everything's for shidduchim, right? It's said all the time, for shidduchim, for shidduchim. You're going to do this because of shidduchim.
Yeah.
And it is because of shidduchim. Because
and just for our listeners, just the term it's for shidduchim is like a colloquial. Shidduchim is the dating system, but it means your entire character, it's almost like where your whole life is geared towards is establishing that family, which for a listener who didn't grow up in that community can sound suffocating. And part of it is, frankly, suffocating. I think that's okay to say.
Yeah.
But some of it is beautiful because we're a very family-oriented community. Yeah. But it could sometimes feel like your entire purpose and sense of self is all geared to having that perfect, beautiful family. And you shared this with Moshe Weinberger. Right. I've been good my entire life. What did it get me? Where am I now?
I was so upset with Hashem. Like, how could God do this to me after everything I did for him? Like, I did all this and I felt so betrayed. And he said, good. I said, what do you mean good? What does that mean, good? He said, if you feel betrayed, that means there's a relationship there. If you didn't feel betrayed, it would mean that you didn't have a relationship with God. If someone came up to me on the street and, said something not nice, it might throw me off a little, but it wouldn't affect my overall life for the most part. Like, I'd be like, okay, that was weird, and walk away. But someone who I care about, or a relationship that I have that's important, if someone says something to me that was hurtful, or if I felt betrayed by someone, it means that there's a relationship there. And it really set me on this. I walked out of that conversation and I was just like, wow. Like, okay, that doesn't make it better. It does not make it better. It's still very hard, but it gave me this knowledge that it's okay to be upset with God. It is okay to be hurt by God. It is okay to feel betrayed by God. We have this image in our minds that it's okay to have these things in a relationship, right? If you had a conversation with somebody and they told you that their marriage was 1000% perfect, they never bickered, they never fought, they never had any issues ever, you might be scratching your head a little bit like, are you actually in a relationship? Because relationships are give and take. And it's working on yourselves together and all the things that come with that.
Yeah.
I don't know so much about it because I was only married for like 5 seconds, but I can imagine, and in my friendships and in other relationships in my life.
You have enough.
Yes.
You have a child and you're an adult and you've been through it. The capacity for betrayal is an indication that there's still a connection there. There's still a relationship and a thriving relationship. So if Moshe Weinberger tells you this, and that's just beautiful. Good that you felt betrayed. If you didn't feel betrayed, then where are we and what are we doing?
Right.
I see in your content, you definitely seem like you've evolved a little bit. Religiously, personality. Can you describe a little bit? I mean, that's the betrayal piece, but I want to return back to the underlying question. How did it affect you religiously?
Yeah, so it was definitely very hard and I struggled coming to a place of understanding. I think that was, for me, one of the biggest things was that I just lacked understanding. I didn't understand why God could do this to me. I didn't understand how my ex could do that to me. I didn't understand how the world could be so cruel. Like, why was this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? And it was so painful and so hard for me to deal with that I just came to a place within myself where it was like, I am not going to understand. I am not going to understand. I am never going to understand this. And I had to learn to accept that I was not going to understand. And once I did, it brought me to a place of growth, spiritually, emotionally, physically. In all areas, I just realized I need to create my own clarity in life. That means working on my emunah and understanding that God did this for a reason. Whatever his reason is, obviously my son had to be born. And if there was no reason, then what am I doing here? Like, I needed for myself to accept that I wasn't going to understand and that God had a plan, because if God doesn't have a plan or he doesn't exist, then for me, there's nothing. Like, if there's no plan, it happened for absolutely no reason, and God didn't have anything for me, then what am I continuing this for? Why would I continue being religious? Why would I continue being happy? Forget religion. Why would I continue living my life in a happy way as a growth-oriented person if there's no purpose and there's no point? So I needed there to be a point. And so I created for myself there is a point. There is a plan. I don't know what it is. That's okay. I don't have to know. And taking it one day at a time was very instrumental for me. I think when I first got divorced, everything felt major. Like, it was like, how am I going to do this long term? Like, I can't be a single mom on Rosh Hashanah.
You get through a Pesach. You can't go through the rest of your life.
I can't do this forget the rest of my life. I can do it for a week. I can do it for a day. Like, I was like, there is no way. I cannot do this. I cannot do this by myself. And it was so like suffocating. And so I learned, my aunt was a single mom for a long time. And I went and sat down and spoke with her. And I said, how do I do this? Because I'm breaking. Like, I am crumbling. I get emotional just thinking about it because I was so broken and so lost in every area. I was angry at God. I was angry at my life. I was just angry. And I couldn't get through a day. Like, I just did not know what to do. And she said, you just take it 1 minute at a time and 1 day at a time and 1 week at a time, and you will see the time will pass. And that is exactly what I did. I just took it 1 minute at a time. I focused on getting through that minute and dealing with that minute, and whatever pain was in that minute, just dealing with that minute and then getting to the next minute. And it became days and it became weeks. And I realized like she was 100% right. And time did pass and I am okay. And I obviously don't want this to be a long-term thing. I have no plans for being a single mom for the rest of my life, but I still sometimes have to narrow it down to 1 hour at a time or 1 day at a time. And some days it's like, all right, like this is a good week. And sometimes it's like, no, this is a rough week. Rosh Hashanah's coming up. It's very hard to know that I'm going into another Rosh Hashanah being a single mom. That was never part of my plan.
Let me ask you a little bit about the cohort within the Jewish community of single mothers. There are really two identities that you hold, and I'm curious if there are cohorts, group meetings, any of that stuff. You are both a single mother and this is even a more curious identity, but one that there isn't a person in the community who doesn't know of this, somebody whose marriage deteriorated, fell apart very quickly within a year, you said.
Yeah.
Basically, right? It was like 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, did you find strength or connection? Are there like single mom groups that you found that you worked with? And what about like people who, I think the greatest fear, especially of young women, is getting married and then like you find out in the yichud room or within a couple, months later, like this is not going to work. And I know like it's nearly impossible to definitively avoid, but there is a demographic of like they got married and then boom, divorce. I'm curious, either of these cohorts, do they exist? Did you tap into them, find strength from them, or I'd rather not? I'd rather just do this on my own. I wasn't looking for support groups.
So in the beginning, I wasn't even looking. When I did start to look, there's not much. I'm in a very interesting space because at the time I was 23 years old.
You're young.
I was young and I had a baby. So there were these events for divorced girls, but they didn't let divorced girls with kids come. And so I felt, like I couldn't be a part of that.
Did you feel excluded? Was that hurtful?
Yes, it was very hard. It was very hurtful. And then there was the other side of the coin. There's these organizations for divorced moms, or divorced women, I should say. And I would go to them and the age demographic is significantly older. And the younger crowd doesn't really go. So I would go and I was like not 5-10 years younger, like 20 years younger than most of the women there. And it was just a very overwhelming feeling. So I kind of felt like I didn't really fit anywhere. At that same time was when I started posting on Instagram and sharing my story a little bit and sharing inspiration for women. It was almost like inspiring other people, and sharing my story motivated and inspired me. Like I was saying it for other people, but it really helped me as well. And I created this space where people felt that they could share with me. And I started doing these anonymous question and answers, and people would ask questions. And then it led to conversations in DM. And I realized how not alone I was. I felt so alone, like no one could ever understand my pain. And you know what? There's a chance that no one will ever understand my pain, and that no one has ever gone through exactly what I've gone through. Maybe someone somewhere has, but you know what? Most people don't go through the exact same situation that someone else goes through.
For sure.
And so realizing that there are so many people who are going through something, my mantra became never alone. And I was sharing it all the time, telling people you are not alone. Like no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. Someone else out there understands somewhat what you're going through. And even if there's no one else that understands, you still have God. God is still there. He may feel like he's in the background, but he's still there. And he's still someone that you can lean on to the best of your ability, because if God's not there, like I said, if there is no God, then what is there? What do we have? We have nothing. And so I did this project. I called it the Shivisi project.
Shivisi, which is the Hebrew word for Shivisi Hashem L'Nagdi Tamid, which means to dwell, so to speak, with God.
Yeah, I said Shivisi Hashem L'Nagdi Tamid. I place God before me always. That was kind of my translation of it. And it was like, I always will have God. And so I created bracelets that said never alone on them. And it was either you could buy it for yourself, but mainly it was to sponsor for somebody else, to give somebody who's struggling a bracelet so they can look down and realize that they're not alone. And during that movement and that whole project, the amount of people who reached out saying how alone they felt and how not alone they feel now was so incredible for me, because I had felt so isolated and so alone, even surrounded by people. I lived, Baruch Hashem, I have a lot of siblings. I'm one of 6. My brother got married, but I lived in the house with a lot of people and my son and my parents, and I was surrounded by people and friends, but I felt so alone. And creating that online space where other people also shared and giving advice to other people and receiving, their feedback really was very, very powerful for me. And I do plan on creating something for single moms. It's definitely in the works, because I do think it is really important for younger single moms, because it doesn't really exist. But I think that there's also a part of it, and maybe this is just my own opinion, but a lot of younger single mothers, and I felt the same way for a long time, it's almost like you don't want it to have happened. I remember when I first got divorced, I was like, I don't want to date anyone who was married before, because I just want to pretend like it never happened. I've come a long way since then, and I'm much more open now, and I have dated both single, never married, and, single divorced guys. But it was almost like I just wanted to pretend it never happened. And I realized that I think a lot of the younger divorced women, even single moms or non, they didn't really go to the divorced events because they didn't want to be part of that club.
That's kind of where I was coming from. No, and you're young enough in the marriage process that if you really want to disassociate and pretend like it never happened, you kind of can. And it was a deliberate choice. I think your entire approach, which is your conception of finding closure by no longer pursuing closure, of saying my closure is going to be making peace with my lack of closure. This is a question. It sounds like a strange question, but you said it so much and it feels like it's such a vivid relationship. And I haven't really been asking this question, though. I want to more. I'm just curious, what on earth do you think about when you talk about God? You've mentioned God like so many times. I'm curious, like, what does that conjure for you? Like, where is that? Like, when you talk about God, what does that represent? That's what?
You're asking, what is God to me?
I guess so. I'm just like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, yeah, what do you mean when you say that? If you had to use a different word, or you had to like write it out in a paragraph, like, I know what it represents. I know I also daven and have a, but I have a hard time talking about God for a host of reasons. And you seem to be very comfortable talking about God as like a very almost like tangible entity.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. It's okay. You can pass on this question. What exactly comes to mind when you keep referring to God?
It's a very interesting question. I think God to me is someone or something that is, I don't want to say a friend, but to me, it feels like a relationship of sorts. I can't explain it or, really put into words who or what or how, but I know that I have hurt feelings, and you can't have hurt feelings if there's nothing there. So I definitely feel like there's a relationship. God is something and someone that I desperately want to be a part of my life, that I want to feel closer to, that I want to connect to. It's something or someone that I feel like I crave that relationship, maybe because it will give me my own understanding, or because it's just something that I've grown up instilled in me. I don't know where that comes from, but it's definitely something that I need to have.
I appreciate your description. From your very beginning of your story, you said you want that conviction that my life is not random, it's not hapless. And what gives you and your own story that kind of like metaphysical transcendent integrity, that like, I don't know what it is, but I'm not just a bunch of molecules bouncing around in the world, but there is metaphysical transcendent integrity to my story, to my emotions, to my brokenness, to my hurt.
There's a purpose.
Yeah, that sense of purpose. I have another question, again, and this might be strange, and you may not want to say this. Does your child look like you or your ex-husband?
He looks like my brothers. Sometimes he looks like my ex, but sometimes he looks like, when people see him, they say he looks like my brothers.
Is it hard because there is a child and inevitably, I mean, your ex-husband is a part of that child's DNA, composition, life. How do you not allow all of the hurt and the feelings you have towards your husband? How do you ensure that your child is not a reminder of that hurt?
I can't say that my child was ever a reminder of the hurt. Like, I don't think that I ever, thank God, I never looked at him and felt hurt. It was more longing. I look at him and I want for him and I want for me and I long for this life that I don't know if I'll ever have, and I don't know what that's going to look like and how that's going to be, and blending, a family and Emir Hashem, like God willing, what that's going to look like. Like there's definitely a sense of longing when I look at him, but it was a very powerful thing that I had to learn very early on, right away, of putting my child first. I don't want my son to feel like he is lacking. And so from literally day 2, I remember I was so broken. I was so upset. I put on music. He was, 9 weeks old, 10 weeks old. I put on music. I stood up and I just rocked with him. Just rocked back and forth. I didn't want him to feel my sadness. I didn't want it portrayed on him and on his life. And I think that kind of became another one of my missions of my son is not going to feel like he is lacking because his situation is different. And so when I see him, there is a sense of longing, but there's also a sense of determination. I think that's another way that fitness has really helped me, because it's hard and you keep going. And it's hard and you keep going. And that's life. It's hard and you keep going and you keep going and you push past it, and it burns and it stings. And it's like, this feels unnatural. This hurts. I want to pull away from it. But instead of pulling away from it, you move towards it, because moving towards it is where the growth happens. If you're lifting weights and you don't feel anything, chances are you're not building muscle.
Yeah.
You got to feel the burn. And if you don't feel the burn, it's not working. And so in my life, I know that, it burns and it hurts. And sometimes it really sucks. But that's where growth happens. The easiness, the easy times, maybe sometimes that's where growth happens, but 99% of the time, it's in the struggles, it's in the pain. That's when the growth happens.
Yeah.
And so learning to face that head on was very important and powerful for me. And it really pushed me to become the person that I am today and to deal with, everything.
I'm curious if there was a specific time after the divorce, going back to your story, where you had at least the clarity, or what were you looking for to say, I'm ready to start dating again? How did you come to that decision? You've made it clear both on social media, that you are dating. How long did that take? And what gave you the confidence to say, I'm going to go back in, and there's so much vulnerability in the dating process, and compounding that by after such a deep betrayal of the marriage, to open yourself up to getting back on, the roller coaster. It could be really, really scary. How did you prepare yourself, and what gave you the confidence to say, I am ready to start dating again?
So number one, therapy. Therapy was very helpful. It really gave me a space to understand and accept that I wasn't going to understand, and speak things out and overcome the fears. Obviously there's so much fear, especially going into another relationship of how do you know? It happen again.
Yeah.
But my therapist was great in assuring me that chances are it won't happen again. So when I did start dating, I think I just felt ready to be loved. And I wanted to be loved, and I wanted my child to have a father figure. And it was super, super important to me. And I think when I started dating, I probably wasn't ready, to be honest. But you never know that you're ready until you're ready.
The way I phrase it is, you always start pedaling before you learn how to pedal.
Exactly.
You're always moving, and then you fall off for the first time. I just want to repeat that phrase because I found it so beautiful and so moving, where I was finally ready to be loved. Can you expand on that? Was there a period in your life where you felt unready to be loved? What does it mean to be ready to be loved?
So I think getting divorced the way that I did, it was very, very painful, extremely painful. And I came to a place, in the process where I put it all on me. For a long time, I felt like it was all my fault. I must have done something. Something had to have happened. I did something. It was me. And I felt unloved by God, unloved by my ex-husband. I just felt almost unlovable. And through therapy and through working through it, I came to a place where I felt that I was deserving. I was deserving of a relationship, of being loved and giving love. I'm such an affectionate and emotional person. And to not have that relationship to be able to give, especially when you have it and you have someone to give to, and then it's almost taken away from you. And it's like, wait, what do I do with all my love now? I poured it into my child. I definitely poured my love into my child, but it came to a place where it was like, there's a child love and there's a spouse love. And I want both, and I'm deserving of both. And I want to feel deserving. And I wanted someone who's going to make me feel loved and special and important.
That is extraordinary of the work that's needed for each of us to feel deserving of love, to feel entitled to love. And that obviously starts with, that self-work that you champion and that sense of agency and responsibility, and also letting go to a degree, letting go of closure, letting go of, if only I could talk to him one more time and really find out why, but fully letting go and saying, okay, I'm not going to find closure, and that will be my closure. It's extraordinary, your positivity, your emotional cadence, your ability to talk about pain with a real smile on your face is just absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you.
What's interesting, this conversation is a part of our Teshuva series. And I was worried that you would find it almost like offensive, like you didn't sin, you didn't do anything. I was worried that it would repeat the very issues that you were grappling with, like more tshuva, But I'm curious, in your own words, I know why it was so important. I reached out to you, which was like kind of out of the clear blue sky. But I'm curious for you, how would you explain why it makes sense that you're a part of the Teshuva series?
I mean, okay, I'll tell you what Teshuva means to me. To me, Teshuva means returning to God. Is that somewhat correct?
I think so.
Okay, good.
Teshuva means to return.
Right. Okay. So to me, Teshuva means returning to God. And my entire life story almost has constantly been this return to God, of bringing God back into my life and keeping my identity associated with God. And after October 7th happened, I, like so many other people, most people, I assume, I felt again this massive betrayal of like, how could God do this to us? Forget me, like us, the people, the hostages, the world, like how could God do this? And so I felt that overwhelming, like how on earth? And so I created this group chat called the Emunah Minute Chat. And every day I post 1 minute of Emunah, just like a quick, make it accessible to everybody. It's not long. It takes, really fast. You just listen to it. You can put it on 2x speed and it takes 30 seconds, and just bringing God back into our life. And so I think that to me would be why I would fit into this series of just my life's journey. My purpose is to keep bringing God into my life and creating some sort of purpose that aligns with God and spirituality.
Emmi, it is such a privilege to speak to you, and really your story in so many ways, I think, encapsulates, at least for me, tshuva, in the sense that the way Rav Kook talks about it, both a very natural, a physical tshuva of just returning to your own sense, feeling at home in your own body, in your own emotional space, in your own life. I just find you incredibly inspiring, and I'm so grateful that you joined us today.
Thank you.
I always end my interviews with more rapid fire questions. My first question is, I'm curious, I always like book recommendations, and I'm curious, you mentioned already one, Bilvavi, Mishkan, Evne, but I'm curious if there are any other books that you think really contributed, specifically on this journey, Jewish or non-Jewish, that helped you find this sense of agency, of moving on without closure. Were there any specific books or thinkers that really helped you find that strength, resilience, and courage?
1,000%. Right away, as soon as you asked, I knew what I was going to say. Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. Best book. The best book ever.
Absolutely.
But my favorite part of the book, and the reason, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this because I know it's rapid fire, but this is a little longer.
I was going to ask you, why? I love Tuesdays with Maury. It's a great book. Why did that stick with you, particularly in your journey, in this journey?
Because at one point, Maury says, and it has stuck with me my entire life. And when this happened, it became like something that I just never forgot. Mitch asked Maury how he deals with the pain of his life. And he said, by feeling the pain and then stepping away from it. feeling whatever you're feeling, acknowledging your feeling. So, okay, I'm feeling anxious. Self, I am feeling anxious. Allowing yourself to feel anxious and then stepping away from it. And even if that means in 2 minutes from now, that anxiety comes back, do it again, repeat the process, but don't push it down and pretend it doesn't exist. It's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel depressed. Feel it, accept it, and then step away from it. And that really shaped my journey.
Absolutely beautiful. Feeling the pain and stepping away from it. My next question is, if somebody gave you a great deal of money and allowed you to take a sabbatical with no responsibilities whatsoever to go back to school to get a PhD, what do you think the subject and title of your dissertation would be?
Women in divorce.
Women in divorce.
Women overcoming the journey of divorce in women.
Okay, we'll work on the title, but I definitely get the subject. I think the title needs to get ironed out a little smoother. But I do appreciate that. My final question is, I'm always curious about people's sleep schedules. What time do you go to sleep at night and what time do you wake up in the morning?
I mean, that has changed a lot over the last 3 years because I had a newborn. But now that I run, I have to go to sleep early because I have to wake up early to run. So I think I go to sleep by like 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
When I'm out past 10, I'm like exhausted.
Done.
Like I go to singles events and I'm wiped. Like it's like people are like just getting started and I'm like, I gotta run.
And what time do you wake up in the morning?
6:30, 7 o'clock.
And you run in the morning?
Yes, I have to run in the morning.
Just like
I have to
on
start
the
my day.
streets?
Yeah, on the streets.
You run outside,
Unless
not on a treadmill?
someone can't watch my son, and then I put him on the couch and run on the treadmill.
Emmi Polansky, I cannot thank you enough for joining us and sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor and a privilege to be here.
Listening to Emmi is really an exercise in many ways of what the Teshuva, what loosely translated as repentance, but it's not the Teshuva that we're talking about over here, because specifically the Teshuva of Rosh Hashanah, as opposed to the Teshuva of Yom Kippur, does not really mention sin. We don't really talk all that much about what we did wrong or any faults that we may have in the prayer services of Rosh Hashanah. And the question is why? Why do we take this break in this focus of Teshuva that began in the beginning of Elul, when we start blowing shofar and we start slichos and we start all of these extra supplications, prayers? Why all of a sudden do we take this break on Rosh Hashanah and it seems the entire theme of Teshuva disappears momentarily? But at least for me, listening to Emmi is really this theme of what the Teshuva of Rosh Hashanah is all about. And that is a Teshuva that is unburdened, disconnected from any specific sin. A Teshuva that just highlights our capacity to do Teshuva. A Teshuva that emerges from our sense of agency. The fact that we remind ourselves that we have the capacity to start again, to start new, to access that sense of reinvention and transformation in the middle of our lives. No matter how difficult the set of cards we've been handed in our lives, no matter how unexpected and debilitating the setback may be, there is a teshuva that emerges of just recognizing our own agency, recognizing that so long as we still have breath in our lungs, we as human beings are vehicles with the capacity to change. We have agency, and that's everything that Rosh Hashanah celebrates. Rosh Hashanah being the anniversary, not of the creation of the world, which we're told was actually 6 days earlier on Chaf Hey Elul, but instead the anniversary of the creation of man. That Rosh Hashanah is the celebration of our own capacity for change, of the possibility of actually starting new. And once we know we have that capacity, once we know we have that agency, once we step into it fully and realize that each of us is needed to bring divinity to this world, and each of us has the capacity and the agency in one way or another to transform our lives a little bit closer, to reflect a little bit more clearly the divinity of God in our lives, to discover it in our lives. Then we can start on Yom Kippur, that more detailed, specific journey of Teshuva, lifting up each of our actions, thinking of all of the consequences. But we can't do that until we really believe that we have the capacity to change. And we can't do that till we really step into our own agency and realize that no matter the disappointments, no matter the fights we've had, no matter the letdowns and the frustrations that have so unexpectedly cropped up, whether in our personal lives or generally what the Jewish people have been through this past year, we take a moment and we recognize that as difficult as things may seem, as dark as things may seem, we have a Rosh Hashanah. We have a beginning of a new year. We have the capacity in whatever small way to access that newness, that transformation, that sense that we can start again, we can build differently, we can take control of our lives. And it's with that image of agency and capacity that I wish each and every one of our listeners a ksiva v'chasima tova, a good gebenched year, a year filled with blessing, both individually and generally for the Jewish people that we so desperately need, a year of peace, of health, of happiness, and of holiness, a year that can be good, a year that should be good, and God willing, a year that will be good. So thank you so much for listening. And I just want to give one more shout out to Emmi Polansky, to look her up on social media at Living Emuna. And without further ado, thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much to our series sponsors, Daniel and Mira Stokar. Really, 3 cheers for you guys. You are the absolute best. I am so grateful for your friendship, your support, your encouragement. Seriously, thanks so much. This episode, like so many of our episodes, was edited by our dearest friend, Dina Emerson. Dina, I am so grateful for you. For real, I've been sending these in so late, and I don't know if you're going to leave this in, you should, but a round of applause for Dina Emerson, who has just been dealing with me with so much patience and graciousness. I am so grateful for you. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, please subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends about it. You can also donate, and please sign up for dailygiving.org. And if you're going to sign up for dailygiving.org, don't be shy. For real, we run on donations. There's nobody that supports 1840 except your dollars of our listeners. So now is a great time. If we have provided anything of value to you and you want to keep this going, you can donate at 1840.org/donate. It really helps us reach new listeners and continue putting out great content. We can't continue without your support. You can also leave us a voicemail with feedback or questions that we may play in a future episode. That number is 516-519-3308. Once again, that number is 516-519-3308. Or you can email us at info@1840.org. If you'd like to learn more about this topic or some of the other great ones we've covered in the past, be sure to check out 1840.org. That's the number 18, followed by the word, you guessed it, 40, FORTY, 1840.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. Thank you so much for listening, and stay curious, my friends.
Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'Yovad Yisrael Omrim Shema Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'Yovad Yisrael Ha'omerim Shema Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'Yovad Yisrael Omrim Shema Yisrael Yisrael.